Welcome to the Church Answers podcast. My name is Jess Rayner. I'm here, as always, with my dad, Thom Rayner. And Dad, you know what I've learned about these podcasts? Do you know what makes it better?
Ice cream?
No, when it's not just you. I've learned that. Of all the podcasts, when we do, it's so much more fun when there's other people here. And
Oh, I see
so,
what you're saying. The I'm inferior, they add superiority to it.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. So today is one of those episodes where we get to bring on some special friends, some guests of ours, and we get to talk about a very specific topic. And so I'm excited to welcome Todd Brown and Isaac Brown of the Brown Church Development Group. Todd and
No,
Isaac, welcome.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
We're excited to be here.
Yeah,
uh, another father-son team, by the way.
that's right. That's
But,
right.
but the, both of them are younger than us.
Both. Well, no, but
Well, wait
but
a
younger
minute.
than
I
you.
don't. Yeah.
I'm looking at my side of the screen. There's the young side on the right side, and there's the not so young side on the left side. So I don't know what your screen looks like, but that's what my screen looks like. So
I'm saying I am older than Todd, and Jess, you are older than Isaac.
I got you. I got you. That I see what you're saying now, and that is true.
If you add up our years, we're almost 70 years old. It doesn't work with them like that.
I got
No,
you.
no. We're almost 110 years old.
Okay, I'm following you. I'm following you. I'm following you. Well, we're
'Cause,
super excited to have them on, and we're going to be talking about church facilities and specifically, stewardship of your church facilities and ways that you can continue to utilize what God has given you and maybe even think towards the future. Before we jump into the topic, I do want to take a moment and thank one of our sponsors, Cheney and Associates. We're so thankful for their work. We call them the accounting firm for the church. They are all about helping you lead your church. And so the way they do that is they handle the numbers. They have decades of experience serving churches across the country. They are accountants who speak your language. And so if you're listening to this podcast today and your church has any kind of accounting or finance needs, go check out CheneyAssociates.com/church answers. If you're watching with us on YouTube, go check out the link in the show notes. Go check them out. They do an amazing job. It's worth a 30-minute discovery call to see what they can do to help you with your church finances. So thank you so much for Cheney and Associates. But we're
Hey,
excited
let
to
me
have the
mention this,
Brown
Jess.
Church Development
Jess,
Group with us today.
Jess, let me say this before we get started.
Okay?
The URL for Brown Church Development, the one that I like the best, is churchfacilityexpert.com. I love that. It tells exactly what they are. Anytime I have an issue related to facilities, I do my best to get them with Brown. We were just talking right before we started recording about a particular church that they wish had called them sooner. They're going to still help them, but they wish that they had made some major, they have major challenges as a result of some decisions that Brown would have helped them to make a lot better. So just so much to talk about, but I know they're going to talk about Simple Church. I've never heard of that. Is that a book?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say this topic is really going to be a wonderful blend of what they do and what you have written in the past. And so we're going to be looking at 5 ways Simple Church can apply to your church facility. And so this is a quite intriguing topic. I feel like this is one where I may take a little bit of a back seat because I'm going to let the 2 experts speak. I'll be here just to make sure everyone just stays in line. But I'm excited. So, Dad, how did this topic come about? How do you blend Simple Church, and then obviously you can bring in Todd and Isaac here. But how do you blend Simple Church with church facilities?
Well, church facilities have purposes. Church facilities have flows. Church facilities can have obstacles. All of those are a part of the Simple Church process. So everything that Eric Geiger and I talked about many years ago in Simple Church can be applied very easily at the church facility point. And so I'm kind of like you, Jess. I want to listen to these guys because I know
Right.
something about Simple Church, but I don't know nearly as much about Simple Church and the facility. So let's just start off. Todd, where did you get this Simple Church idea other than Thom Rayner? How did you get it to apply to the church?
Well, I'd like to take all the credit for it, but I have to give the credit to Isaac because
Oh,
Isaac's
I
the
asked the wrong person first question.
Isaac, this is kind of the way his brain was working, and he looked at through the Simple Church, and he's saying, "Dad, this is what we're doing, and I can apply it." So we start with clarity is the key. And I don't know, Isaac, if you wanna run with that.
Yeah, Isaac, just tell your dad to be quiet. I want to listen to you
Yeah.
for just a second.
Yeah. Here at Brown, I work with churches all across the country, and a lot of times I refer them to your book. And so I don't know if there's a royalty situation there that we can figure out, Tom.
There
but
is. I get them.
but as a lot of churches have to clarify and simplify their ministries, their ministries are reflected in their buildings, because you're building a building for ministry. And so if your ministries are out of whack or your balances are out of whack, you will end up with facility issues. And oftentimes when we get calls from pastors who have tuned into Rainer on Leadership, they've inherited a building. They've inherited a building that when it was built, they didn't do the same ministry programs as they want to implement now. And so they start running into a lot of issues. Like Todd said earlier, really how churches have to have clarity of purpose. We think that clarity is key. We think clarity is kindness. In all ministry elements, clarity is kindness. And your buildings ought to be clear. They ought to not cause issues when it comes to preventing your ministry objectives and ultimately preventing the gospel. So really, just as the simple church begins with clarity, and with your discipleship process and all those kind of things, clear pathways of travel and clarity when it comes to what you value should come out in your building.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love how you said, just as ministry without clarity leads to confusion, buildings without strategy create clutter. I wonder how much that rings true for our listeners, thinking of clutter within their buildings. That understanding, where you're headed as a ministry is so important. Just quick example at my church, we have a room that's kind of this room we don't really know what to do with. It kind of has multiple purposes, and it came up recently, like, well, what do we do with that room? And it was like, no one knew what to do with it, really, because that particular room didn't have any clarity. We thought it was a cry room. We thought it was maybe a future cafe. It had all this stuff, and so we're going, there's no clarity to that room. So, as our listeners are listening to this, going, yeah, I need clarity. How do they begin to do that? Does that come with maybe thinking future? Is that maybe kind of what we're talking about? Growth must be purposeful, which is kind of the second way that Simple Church can apply to your church facility. Is that kind of the next segue?
And Todd, you've talked to me about that several times, about how this must be purposeful, how we have to do buildings on purpose. And so as Isaac developed this Simple Church framework for churches, talk to us about the growth and how it has to be planned in there. Todd?
Oh, me? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, if we wanted to be purposeful with this, we need to understand that just not having just a bigger building is what the goal is. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that say, "Oh, we need to add to our building. We're just busting at the seams." And so one of the first things we do is look at every space and we ask them, "How are you using it?" And I've had a ton of projects where they just go down the line, down a hallway. We don't use that room. 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 But we need some more Sunday school space. And it's like, well, wait a minute. When you look at, you look at the spaces, you've got enough space. So you need to be strategic. And sometimes people just are very reactionary. So your growth has to be on purpose. And, Isaac always says that we got to look at programming before we start looking at building. Mm-hmm. So any time that you're going to grow the church or you feel like you're growing, don't just run and spend $1 million and be very reactionary. You've got to be very purposeful, and you got to look at exactly all the things that you're needing and where they're at, and there's a process to assess that.
So we have developed partnerships, we at Church Answers, for years and years and years, and we really consider people like Brown part of our family at Church Answers. I mean,
Yep.
we're so well connected with you that we don't think about any other church facility person or expert or team other than you. And then of course you heard about Cheney and the relationship that we have Church Growth Services Stewardship Company. So there is a company, guys, that we recently kind of fell in love with, that same way that we have done with y'all in ministry. And so I'm going to segue for a moment, and then I want to come back to Isaac, and I want to talk about the core, because I think that's fascinating. What is the core, and why should it come first? But Jess, I was segueing into our latest, and been with us about a year, but an incredible outreach ministry called Upward.
Yeah. Just take a moment here just to pause and move away from facilities and talk about outreach just for a second. One of our other partners and one of the other sponsors of this podcast is Upward. They are all about helping you reach your community, and they do it through sports. In particular, Upward running for adults. I love this. I am a runner. I signed up for a full marathon that I'm going to be running with one of my brothers in January. It is absolutely amazing. It's a great way to reach your community. One of the best ways is to offer a 5K challenge. So many people love just to get out there and do a 5K. Get off the couch, do a 5K. Upward will help you reach your community by doing a 5K challenge. It's simple to start. You can build strong connections. Go check out upward.org/runcoach. Upward.org/runcoach and see what they can do for you and help you reach your community. We love Upward, but we love what they're doing, and I love what Todd just said about. As a pastor, Todd, you said something that was like music to my ears. We want to know your church before we make recommendations on how to build. We want to know what you're running toward. Like, you want to sit down. What I hear as a pastor is you'd love to sit down with whoever needs, whoever's facility needs, and see where they're headed in their growth and be purposeful for that. That was absolutely amazing. And again, that hits at the core of who we are and why we love partnering with you guys. So we've been looking at 5 ways simple church can apply to your church facility. Our first one is clarity is key. The second one is growth must be purposeful. And the third one is the core comes first. So I'd love to hear you guys kind of explain what that means. The core comes first.
Yeah. So your core facility spaces are essentially they are what you need in order to function in every pretty much on a standard Sunday ministry. Okay, so you need an auditorium or sanctuary, and you need your relational space, and then you need children's space of some kind. Okay. Now, some churches, they have the children in with them in the sanctuary, but we still require somewhere where parents can go and have children's space, education space, those kind of things. So that's what I call the big three. Okay. Jess, I know that you have planted many churches. You've gone into buildings that aren't churches and had to make them work in the past. And what we typically recommend churches do is look at those big three. Where can you have the kids, where they're safe? What's your auditorium? And then what's your relational space? Those are the big three spaces. And then you have all the supporting things around that, such as parking. That's core. Yeah. Parking is core. If you have 10 parking spots but 100 seat auditorium, you're never going to get 100 or not consistently. Yeah. And so what we see is just like in ministry, where you have your core ministries that really cause the engine to go, and as those function well, you can start branching off and starting other ministries on the side. We think of facilities in a very similar way, where you have these spaces that are necessary for growth. I can't tell you how many times we've run into churches that they have all the what I would typically call luxury items. They have the gymnasiums, they have the food pantries, they have the schools, but they end up shrinking because they haven't kept up on their core spaces that are meant to expand as your church expands, namely your auditorium or your sanctuary and your relational space and your children's space. The that will be a limiter for most churches.
That's
And
good.
what we see is if you don't keep those things in balance, you eventually will fall to your lowest common denominator.
Okay. Okay. So by the way, as a church planner, I said I was not picky. If I said anything with four walls in a bathroom, I will take. When you're a church planner, you get whatever you take. But I get that. When you're looking for a space, even a church planner, what's your core ministry? So I love this so far. Like I love this picture y'all are painting. Hey, we want to know clarity. We want to know where you're headed as a church. We're going to come in. We're going to talk about growth. All right. It's got to be purposeful. At the same time, we're not going to neglect your core ministries, your worship space, your parking, your kids ministry, your relational space, which is typically like a lobby. It could be more than that. So you've kind of had this mapping that's going to take place. So as you begin to grow, and I heard you say this, you talked about balance, Isaac. You talk about balance, and that's our fourth way Simple Church can apply to your church facility is balance prevents bottlenecks. So explain that. I don't know, Todd, if you want to take this one. Isaac, you want to take this one? Balance prevents bottlenecks.
Yeah, I see churches all the time that get what we call out of balance, and I think that there a lot of people will relate to the parking stalls and your auditorium. If you only have 2 parking stalls and you have 1,000-seat auditorium, you're out of balance. So there's going to be a limiting factor. But what people really don't realize that there's a lot of other things in there that need to be balanced out, like relational space. It used to be we were very institutional in our process of church, and so we had what we called a narthex. You could do the spread wings, and you could touch each wall of the narthex because it was a little larger than a coat closet.
A narthex. Hold on. You got to explain what a narthex is.
Yes, you are too young.
You're too young.
What's a narthex?
If you don't know
You're
what a
too young.
narthex, you need to learn this history. Tell him what a narthex is, Todd.
Yeah, and the narthex is where when you come in, it's like if you look at a lot of the older churches, when you come in with the 5 steps in front, and then you go through this little breezeway that's called the narthex.
Okay.
That's where they kept their coats, and you were right into the worship space, into the sanctuary.
I got you.
So
I've never heard that word before. I know that room you're talking about. I just called it like a mini lobby. So
Sam's church has this, Jess.
okay.
So
Yeah,
he doesn't
so
call it a narthex, but he has that same thing.
Yeah. So what they used to have what they called a narthex, that's to come in, but then you also had a fellowship hall, right? So now the way the culture is, you really need relational space. So when you walk in the doors, you need a place to meet and greet, because you're probably not going to go home and have Sunday dinner with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
That's
so
a
good.
thing of the past. That you're probably too young for that too. So as the church spaces and culture has changed, we've got these bottlenecks that are swimming upstream for culture, and that lobby area, whatever you want to call it, needs to be very relational, because today people aren't going to even get to your fellowship hall to get to know you. So that has to balance with your worship. So here's how it plays out in reality. Some of the old school guys are still trying to grow that worship to 1,000-seat auditorium, and they just have a narthex. Well, we know now that the bottleneck is going to be relational. Your relationships are going to be stifled during your Sunday, because they're just passing through a little room to get to 1,000-seat auditorium, and guess what happens? Once they're done, they pass through and they leave. There's no connection. There's no interaction.
Yep.
And so that gets out of balance. And the hardest thing for us to convince people is to balance their facility. Same way with the nursery, same way with the children's area. There's just a whole bunch of areas that are going to create bottlenecks in your ministry and actually just choke it off. You don't have enough relational space for people to get to know you, you're done.
Yeah. And
Well,
it really stifles any simple church model where you're trying to get them this into a discipleship pathway. Because what you're saying is come, consume, and then leave as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
And so that's really where your ministry style has to be reflected in your building. And quite honestly, the 1,000-seat auditoriums with a very tiny narthex, that is not how we do church nowadays, oftentimes. And it definitely does not match the simple church model.
all right. So Isaac, we got a couple of minutes left. I want you to wrap this up with number 5. Probably the one I want to spend more time on. And I know you're going to record another podcast with us, so we may expand this if I don't get enough of this. Vision number 5 should guide, not distract. What are you saying?
Yes. So in our next podcast, I believe we're going to talk about the different types of spaces that are in a church. And the very last item that we list in our list of spaces is our visionary spaces. And oftentimes churches have very great visions, and some of those might be, we want to build a gymnasium, or we want to have a school, or we want to have whatever it may be, but they do not have an actual strategy behind it. They haven't reached out to an organization like Upwards, right, and actually developed a way to actually create disciples through having those spaces. They usually, and I'll just use gymnasiums for example, churches will have these, what we call visionary spaces, and they'll say, if we build it, then maybe people will come. You know, if we're trying to attract the youth, we should just build a gymnasium and maybe Michael Jordan will walk in. I mean, we see it all the time. And what ends up happening is churches create these spaces that are, I think, very good visions, but they're done out of order. They didn't focus on their core spaces. They didn't grow with purpose. You know, they didn't keep within balance. And so they go and they cast this vision, and it ends up draining them completely.
Jess, let's unpack that some more. I mean, Todd and Isaac have given us not just nuggets, they've given us some steak to chew on.
That's right.
And I'm glad we're going to be doing 2 podcasts with them, and we're dropping them on the same day. So if you're listening to this one or watching this one on YouTube, then you can, the other one will be ready for you too. But I know you want to say one final word. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll be back with you. But I know you want to say a final word about our good friends at Cheney.
Yeah, well, before I say something about Cheney, if you're a pastor and you're listening to this podcast, if you're like me, you're going, I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, the relational space. How do I even expand that? Like, how does my facility, correspond and enhance my vision? There's so many questions, even in this past, 20 minutes, that I'm thinking, I need to go back and revisit some of this. So if you're like me, make sure you go check out churchfacilityexpert.com. Go see what they're all about at the Brown Church Development Group. And maybe if you're thinking about having some facility needs, maybe you're thinking about remodeling or building, go check them out. We love that they're one of our partners. But we also love our other partner, our final sponsor that we want to mention here on this episode of the Church Answers podcast, and it is Cheney and Associates. Again, we call them the accounting firm for the church. They're all about helping you in your accounting needs at your church. So maybe you have a bookkeeper that's getting ready to retire and you don't know what to do. Well, go check out CheneyAssociates.com/churchanswers. Let them see what they can do. And who knows? Maybe Cheney Associates will find some more money you didn't know that was there, and then you can go contact Brown Church Development Group and have them help you with your facility needs. It could just be a win-win. Go check both of those, and who knows what God can do. Well, thank you so much for all the listeners out there. If you're on YouTube, give us a like, give us a comment. If you're on your podcast, whatever app you're on, make sure you just give us a review. Thanks so much for joining us. We love asking those questions about church life, and we hope along the way we're providing some church answers. So thank you so much for joining us on the Church Answers podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.